I should introduce you as Donald Trump. That'd be funny. I'm not gonna do it though.
Hey, guys, I'm here on the Unapologetic Apologists.
Okay, frankly, I have the best guests. Okay, frankly, the best guests is on my show. And I don't say that about my own guests. Other
The
people tell me.
greatest of the greatest of all time.
Yeah. Oh, well, we could have that. That's just got off to a weird start. All right. Very excited to have my next guest. We met through Reasonable Faith. He's the co-director of Reasonable Faith. I almost said Lancaster. It's pronounced Lancaster, right?
Lancaster.
Is it Lancaster?
Lancaster, the quick Lancaster. Yeah.
Lancaster. Okay, there I got it. Okay, good enough. Zack Armstrong, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely, man. It's good to be on here.
Yeah. Who is your co-chapter leader again?
Jesse Skaggs.
Jesse Skaggs. Okay, I didn't want to say his name wrong, so I gave it to you. And you guys are in I almost said it wrong again. Lancaster Alliance Church.
Yeah, we meet there. Yep.
Okay, awesome. So we were just talking before we started about Ben Shapiro and how we really want him to get a prominent Christian apologist like William Lane Craig. And who were you saying?
I was saying N.T. Wright. I would love to see like a Christian historian, someone who's really into the Greek and Hebrew and can really press him. Someone who's read most of the Jewish writings would be someone on his even playing ground.
Well, it's funny. One of the things, Ben Shapiro, and I don't know if this is necessarily a criticism from Ben Shapiro, but one thing he says a lot is, well, Jesus didn't deviate from the Old Testament that much. And one of my points is be like, the Old Testament, that's part of it. It all goes together.
Yeah, it's read the Sermon on the Mount. It's a little, he goes into a little into depth with it, but it's just I think he's interested. I really do. I mean, I would hope he's interested. I just don't know if he's gone to the right areas and avenues into looking into who Jesus really was. Like, it'd be interesting to see like who he's read up on and he's interacted with in regards to Jesus. It'd be really cool to see who's actually talked to. I know he's had a few. He had Father Barron on his show, and he had John MacArthur on his show. But it would be interesting to see who else he's engaged with. I know Andrew Clavin is a Christian, and Walsh is there, who's a Christian as well. So he definitely has some guys around him who are at least Christian and familiar with him. But I don't know. Ben always seems like he's kind of to himself. So who knows how much interaction goes on there. So
yeah, well, that's one of the things is like typically when I see him have these conversations, it's always like about what's different between the Old and New Testament, and maybe what are the differences between Judaism and Christianity. But one thing I find interesting that I'd like to talk to him about is it would be very, I feel like, similar to a debate you might have with an atheist, is because if you're a Jew and you don't believe Jesus was God in the flesh, then you kind of have to have some argument like we press the atheists on to explain the historical facts surrounding Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, whether he's read anything on the empty tomb or whether he's, actually dealt into, any of the reappearances or, how do you deal with Paul, this Pharisee, this zealous Pharisee who all of a sudden becomes a Christian, or, Jesus's brother becomes the bishop of Jerusalem. Like, how do you deal with those kind of things as a Jew? Like, all right, this guy was walking around saying that he's the Messiah. His brother doesn't believe him. And then 3 days later, there's a so-called appearances. And now his brother believes that his brother was the Messiah and is preaching him as king. It's like, how do you deal with that? Do you there's just so many different things that have to be accounted for.
Yeah, it's funny. I was reading. I always do this. I read the YouTube comments, and I never respond. Even on my own videos, I typically have a rule that's like, don't respond to the comments because that's not going anywhere.
Don't start it.
But I was reading one that was, it was one of those atheists saying, well, you can't trust what the New Testament writers said because, of course, they were biased to believe Christianity is true. And I'm thinking, you just brought up Jesus' brother. It's like he wasn't biased to believe it. He didn't believe his brother when he was alive. What's suddenly changing after he dies?
Exactly. Or even Paul. I mean, Paul was throwing Christians in prison. Then all of a sudden, on his way to Damascus, all of a sudden now he's a Christian. It's like what happened? What could possibly convince someone to get rid of, a Pharisee was like the top 1%. You had wealth, you had prestige, you were the top of the cream of the crop, and all of a sudden you're going to throw all that away because you had a vision of Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, how do you explain that? There's no other really way to explain it.
Yeah. That's like all the disciples dying to what they believed in. And
Absolutely.
I think J. Warner Wallace covers it really. J. Warner Wallace, he's like completely revolutionized the way I think about the New Testament.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I love how he always gives these analogies, and one of them is the conspiracy theory. Like, there's 12 of them. Of course, John he wasn't executed, but but they're on different parts of the earth. They can't communicate, and so if this is a lie, if you and I are separated by long distances, even if it was just us two in the conspiracy, I don't know that you haven't given it up. Yeah. Like, why aren't I going to give it up just to save my life?
Yeah. And why would you go, to your death for it? Like, you didn't get anything out of it. It's not like it didn't bring you wealth, didn't bring you prestige, it didn't bring you power. Mm-hmm. You got nothing out of this but people chasing you down and clubbing you and imprisoning you. And like, why would you stick with that lie? There's no logical reason to stick with that lie.
Not a good lie.
No, not at all.
Could have got a lot more. So something else we were talking about was the event with Jordan Peterson, William Lane Craig, and Rebecca Goldstein, was it?
Goldstein, yeah.
Yeah. That was really interesting because, like, the very first post I ever saw, there was all three of them listed there, but all I saw was Jordan Peterson, William Lane Craig. And if you scroll through the comments, everybody was like, seriously, Jordan Peterson and William Lane Craig are going to be in the same event? This is crazy. And I think your and I opinions are probably the same as a lot of other people. It was awfully disappointing.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I was super excited to see where the conversation would go. I mean, they were given each, like an introduction where they could speak and talk. It wasn't like a debate format. It was just kind of like a sit down conversation kind of thing. So they kind of pretty much could just go anywhere with their conversation. But man, it just would have been a lot better if it was just the two of them.
Yeah. Now, keep your pants on, everybody. We're not sexist. Yeah. It's not because she was a woman.
Exactly. No offense. No offense
because,
to but
yeah, and honestly, even if it was like a Harris or somebody who could have, well, even Harris technically probably would have done the same thing, just in a more intelligent sounding way. Again, no offense to her, but when she brought up the Euthyphro dilemma, which is something I've talked about, that's been refuted time and time again.
Yep.
And clearly she hadn't studied up enough because she clearly thought this was the first time William Lane Craig was ever hearing of it.
Exactly. Yeah, you could tell she didn't do any background information like study on any of these guys. I just she tried to pitch in on every single conversation, and it was just, I don't know. You could see Peterson was a little frustrated with it too. But there was a lot of interaction between Craig and Peterson, which I wish would have gotten deeper. Like, I wish they would have interacted more. And then it just would have been like either they just stopped, or she chimed in, or the conversation just kind of stopped. Like, it would have been awesome to see them on like the Rubin Report, where they could just sit down and just which would have been really cool. But
or on the Joe Rogan podcast, because boy, would Joe Rogan get a dose of it.
Yeah, I would love to see a Christian really come on his show as well.
Yeah, I think, like, to his credit, I don't think it's that he's necessarily afraid of the ideas. I just think that's just not the type of conversations he has with people. No. Although I really would like to get on Joe Rogan's show someday. That'd be a lot of fun.
What about the Crowder show? Would you be interested in going on the Crowder show?
Are you kidding? He was the one who inspired me to start a YouTube channel. So if I were ever to get on his show, that would be the dream.
That'd be cool. That'd be fun. You'd have to show up in your underwear though, like the shorts.
Yeah.
With Ben Shapiro conversation? He show up in like these like
His Ranger panties.
running shorts or something.
It was Ranger panties and cowboy boots.
Yeah, that's pretty epic. You could
Yeah.
tell he did that just for Ben.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they shook hands and he's pulling his hand closer to him, like touch the leg, touch the leg.
He
That
is
was
funny.
funny. Yeah. Yeah, no, he's inspired me a lot. I'm not as good with the comedy. The videos I have on my channel so far tend to err more on the serious side. And
Yeah.
that's just naturally I tend to when I'm writing, I just tend to write about deep issues
Yeah.
and things I'm thinking about a lot. You know, I want to do a lot more like what you and I are doing. We're just kind of chit chatting, having a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool, man.
Yeah. Another thing with the Jordan Peterson William Lane Craig debate, because there are some people who have on YouTube they've edited out just the Jordan Peterson and William Lane Craig opening statements and put them together and say Jordan Peterson versus William Lane Craig.
Okay.
And I think the reason for that is because it almost sounded like they were disagreeing, right? So you
Yeah.
have William Lane Craig who gives a speech, and he's basically saying, if we believe that there is objective meaning in life, we should
Mm-hmm.
believe that God exists, because on atheism, you wouldn't have any objective meaning.
Yeah.
And then Jordan Peterson gets up there and he's talking about, well, of course there's meaning, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's saying that's a dumb question. Of course
Yeah.
there's meaning in life. And he gives the analogy because it sounds like he's disagreeing with Craig because Craig talks about, you know, in a million years or millions of years, you know, in the heat death
Yeah.
of the universe,
Yeah.
what's really going to matter?
Exactly.
And Jordan Peterson was kind of fighting back against that because he was saying if you're listening to a symphony, right, there's meaning in the symphony, and if someone were to say, well, it's going to be over in an hour,
Yeah.
he's like that wouldn't take away the significance of it. And he also talked about, you know, if there's a child who's sick and dying, you wouldn't say to the child, who cares, sport? In a million years, it's not going to matter anyway.
Yeah.
And I think this is what I was talking to Frank Turek about with the morality question, was that they were actually having two different discussions, right?
Yeah.
Craig is talking on the ontological level.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying ontologically, if God exists, you can have meaning, but if God doesn't exist, you can't have meaning.
Yeah.
And here's Peterson, he's on the epistemological level, how you know something,
Yep.
and he's saying, well, of course there's meaning. And so
Yeah.
I think he might think he's disagreeing with Craig there, but I think he's just making a really strong case that there is objective meaning.
There is meaning, yeah. And if I remember correctly, I believe Craig did press him on like where do you get that foundationally.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not remembering Peterson's response, but it wasn't, you know, he was asking where would you ground it? Do you ground it in God, or is it some like Platonic idea or abstract idea that's out there? And I think if I remember correctly, Peterson kind of dodged it, which, you know, something he might not want to get into. But again, if they had an hour together to talk about it and
I
not have
know.
Goldstein chime in, it would have been cool to see him press that.
Yeah. After I get a couple interviews under my belt and I feel confident, I want to invite both of them to come on the show.
Yeah, that'd
You
be
know,
cool.
right now I'm still in the preliminary stage. I'm still kind of nervous.
Yeah.
Doing these.
Yeah.
And especially with two heavyweights like those two.
Yeah.
But and yeah, I definitely like to get them both on. Well, I think I know what you're talking about. Because I've watched it a couple of times. William Lane Craig was saying, you know, I was very heartened, Jordan, to hear your affirmation of the
Yep.
objectivity of moral values. And he said, and I would press you to have that move you past naturalism.
Exactly.
And I think it's funny, I think it was William Lane Craig who suggested the Platonic idea to him.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jordan Peterson kind of went with that. He said, I think you can make an argument for the biological origin of morality. He said, but and to Peterson's credit, he says, I don't think it can stand by itself. He says, I think the evolutionary process would be kind of shaping itself, maybe Platonic ideals.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
Which I think, again, if you're going to be an atheist, which I know Peterson isn't,
mm-hmm.
but so say somebody else who's an atheist, I think that would be your strongest case, would be to affirm Platonic ideals.
Yeah. You have nothing else to ground it into. I mean, that was the whole debate with Sam Harris and William Lane Craig. There was no grounding for Sam Harris. He just had to redefine what he meant by good as the flourishing of conscious creatures. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and Craig really pounded him on that in the debate. You know, if you don't have a grounding, then it says who. You know, he referenced that Duke lawyer who wrote an essay on where we ground laws, like our laws that we govern our country. It's like we just don't. There's nowhere to ground them on an atheistic level, and it's that schoolyard bully who yells out, "Says who?" That's atheism. That's the difference between like ontology and epistemology. Is like you can argue it till you're blue in the face, but if you can't ground it, then it's just subjective.
Yeah.
And that's what was kind of odd about Harris's stance of being like believing in objective morality, but without a grounding, it's not objective,
Well, it's one of those things like when atheists are talking about this, and Matt Dillahunty and Sam Harris do the same thing. It's like obviously we can agree on their starting premises, like suffering is bad, well-being is generally a good idea.
Yeah.
But I don't see how you can ground, again, that's an epistemological discussion. I don't see how you can ground that ontologically, because it's like, just because those are the things we as humans prefer, what makes that objective?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, Craig gets into that evolutionary idea, which he got from Darwin. If we would rewind the clock and humans were to evolve again, if we evolved, just kind of using their arguments. Yeah. But if a new set of humans were to come about, they might have completely different, moral programmings. Just because if you're not founding it in something that's outside of humans, then it's going to change. It has to change because of evolutionary biology. So that was kind of his whole premise is you have to ground it in something outside of humankind. We all agree, about the flourishing of human beings. That's not a debate, and it's always a straw man that they bring up, like you can't be moral without God. It's like that's not what we're not saying you can't be moral, and you got to do that with Turek, which is great. It's like that's not what we're saying. We're asking, where do you ground that? Where do you come to that conclusion? It's really hard to talk about. You really have to think about it. Even I remember just getting into this. I've always loved the moral argument. It's always been my favorite argument. But we use these big words of ontology and epistemology, and it's all super fancy. But you have to use those because the basis of your argumentation, it's essential to what you want to talk about. Like if you're not going to ground morality, then it's just subjective.
Yeah.
And then it's whoever.
Well, they do this weird thing, and I've heard Matt Dillahunty and Sam Harris both say this, which is we can start with subjective premises, but then build an objective moral framework on top of that. And as far as I can tell, that's just a self-contradiction.
Yeah.
Like if your premises are subjective, then whatever framework you're building on top of it is going to be subjective.
Exactly. Also. And then it's just cultural. I mean, that's what Nazi Germany did. Nazi Germany said the Aryan race is going to be the best. And they took a subjective premise and built their so-called objective referent to that. That's exactly what Nazi Germany did.
Yeah.
So, that doesn't mean it's right, and it's certainly not grounded. That's what Craig's always was pressing. Had Germany won World War II and brainwashed everyone into believing that, the Aryan race was supreme and Jews were bad, that doesn't mean it was right. It doesn't matter if you're going to just try and build off of a subjective ideal. That's not going to make it objective. It has to be outside.
That's one of the things Michael Shermer is saying. Michael Shermer is saying, well, they'd still be wrong because he grounds it in, well, we know we don't like to suffer, so we can't inflict that on somebody else. And it's compelling to agree with him, but at the same time, it's like, it's like if the people who believe the same way Michael does lose in the war and don't get to put their idea forth, at the end of the day, it has to be grounded in majority opinion.
Yeah, and you're also only empathizing with those who are suffering. You're not empathizing with the people who are committing the suffering. What if the people who are committing the suffering like it? You're only putting yourself in one person's shoes, not the other. That's
exactly it. That's exactly it.
That's the problem.
That's perfect.
You're only assuming those who are suffering, not the ones who are committing the suffering.
Yeah.
You put yourself in the other person's shoes. What are you going to say? Oh, no, this is wrong. It's like, well, no, they were doing it because they liked it. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
Like obviously we don't like suffering. No one likes suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's definitely I see the moral argument as one of the strongest for the existence of God, just because of this grounding that's required. I haven't seen any atheist posit any sort of grounding. I just watched the debate with Craig on like abstract, like a Platonic moral ideal that's
Mm-hmm.
just out there in space. But again, that doesn't seem too convincing either.
Yeah, well, here we might as well follow this all the way down to the bottom because I can already see like the comment section lighting up with objections to what we said so far.
Hmm.
So, so just to set a couple, tell me what you think of this because this is something I've been trying to think through. Because what I see happening a lot is we have these terms subjective morality and objective morality,
Hmm.
right? And you'll see Sam Harris, if you watch when he was on the Ben Shapiro special, he's building a framework. But what he's doing is he's just using the word morality and he's switching in the conversation between subjective and objective. So that
Yeah.
way he starts with subjective, but by the end of his argument, he's at an objective morality,
Yeah.
which is the fallacy of equivocation.
Yeah.
But as far as I'm concerned, we should not do away with them because there's a fair time and a place for those terms. But I
Yeah.
think either there is a category of morality, which by definition is objective, or there isn't a category of morality, in which case we're just discussing how we evolved and what the social structures have evolved to look like.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And also, even to make matters worse, then you got to get into duties. Why should we do those things?
Mm-hmm.
That's where I think the importance of objective moral values is more impressive to me is based on the duties like that
Mm-hmm.
we should have to fulfill. If you just want to say, all morality is subjective, it's like, well, then no one has any obligation to do anything good. There's
Yeah.
no there's no duty to perform a certain task. If you come across someone drowning in a river, it's like, well, you don't have to save them. There's
Yeah.
no value to that. There's no right or wrong in going out there and saving their life or not saving their life.
Yeah.
So the duties really drive the values as well, and that's
Mm-hmm.
where you get into divine command theory and all that kind of jazz, which we don't need to open up. So
Right. Right. Well, it's funny. It's funny you bring that up because I think that's one of the reasons that you can't ground morality in some kind of abstract Platonic form, right?
exactly.
Because you wouldn't have any duty or
Yep.
obligation to
Yep.
abide by that Platonic form.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think one of the things Craig has brought up that I'm not sure if I quite agree with, just I guess putting on the devil's advocate hat for a
Mhm.
minute. He's talked about if you did have these Platonic values like love and justice, then equally you would have the opposing Platonic values, the evil things,
Yeah.
right? And so how are you to arbitrarily pick certain ones to follow over others?
Yeah.
If I was, say, an atheist advocating for Platonic um, uh, foundation of good, to
Yeah.
say, I would say kind of the same thing we argue about God's nature, which is their goodness is just the ideal Platonic form, but it's any deviation away from that, which would result in evil. I don't know what you think about that.
No, I would agree with that. Um, I see what you're saying, and that's kind of what I was getting into. You know, C.S. Lewis says you can't really know what a crooked line looks like unless you know what a straight line looks like. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a very similar vein. You know, any deviation of goodness is just going to be evil in a
Yeah.
sense. But that's exactly how we ground God's nature.
Mm-hmm.
Any deviation of God's nature is going to be counter. So, you could say that, and I would definitely agree. But again, I think it gets back to duties. There's no reason to perform those tasks. That's the problem I would have
Yeah.
with abstracts.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, okay, this is good. So what?
Yeah.
There's no reason to do it.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. I put out a post on the Facebook page that you voted on, which is which argument is stronger, the moral argument or the contingency argument. And that was for Cameron Bertuzzi because he says the
Yeah.
contingency argument is stronger. Here's the reason I think the moral argument is stronger personally. which is with all these arguments, I'm always criticizing my own arguments, right? I'm always arguing against myself from the perspective of an atheist.
Yeah.
And till this day, I don't think I can come up with a compelling case against moral realism. And so long as you have moral realism, it follows that you have to have a person that it's grounded in.
Yeah.
And so here's the two cases I think that would be strongest for the atheist to make. The first would be that you have these Platonic ideals of goodness, and that apart from humans, they're not really objective, but as humans evolve, humans, the evolutionary process, kind of is shaped around these Platonic ideals. And so it evolves within us. And so then we have an objective duty to one another.
Yeah.
I think that would be a fair case for the atheist to make.
Yeah. I mean, that's where it gets back to. I always loved the way Ravi Zacharias put it. In order to differentiate between good and evil, you have to have a moral law. And in order to have a moral law, you have to have a moral lawgiver. And the atheists will always raise the objection, okay, well, why do you need a moral lawgiver? And the answer is because, questions of good and evil are always raised by a person or about a person. It's always value in human beings. We don't talk about that in nature. Like Craig even brings that up, like a lion killing a zebra. He doesn't murder the zebra.
Yeah.
He just kills the zebra. All these instances are always raised with personhood involved. And that's where the intrinsic value of humans by God comes into play. And that's the objective grounding as well. So it kind of just draws together perfectly, which if you want to say it's abstract, well, then there's no grounding. There might be a grounding, but there's no duty. But then there's no reason why we should do it from a inner perspective, like people to people. There's no reason to do it. So it's I would agree.
Well, yeah. So I think where that case would ultimately fall apart is the question would just become, well, what's our duty to one another, and who gets to decide among us, right? Like if someone like Hitler gets the most power, well, do we now have a duty to him as a person to follow his commands? And so I do think you need that. That's one of the things I said about the Euthyphro dilemma, which is one of the complaints about it is, well, is God just arbitrary? And my point was, well, even if God is arbitrary, at least that's still an objective standard to which we can look to. That's somebody outside of us.
Yep.
Right? It's still, well, he said so we got to do what he says, even if it's arbitrary.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I think one of the other cases the atheist can make is, well, they would have to argue that there is no category of morality, right? That it is subjective. And you see people like Cosmic Skeptic arguing this.
Yeah.
And I think
I saw that.
I think the way you can make that case, because Craig goes against it by saying, well, we have more reason to trust our instincts of objective morality than to believe any premises and argument against moral objectivity.
Yeah.
And I think the way you could argue against that is it's just so grounded in our biology. Even if you look at rats, the studies show, Jordan Peterson's talked about this, that there's fair play among rats, that they have a kind of an ethic that they've worked out amongst each other.
Yeah. And
so I think you can make the argument that if it starts there, by the time it gets to human beings, it just feels so objective because it's so a part of our biology.
Yeah, but then if you're aware of that, why do it? If you're aware that it's just some innate evolutionary byproduct of human evolution, then it's just taboo not to steal from somebody.
Yeah.
To come to that conclusion or to come to that knowledge would just be, I mean, why do it? If you really want to be an honest atheist, if you want to come to that conclusion. And it's just...
Yeah, I was debating an atheist about it, right? And we kept going around in circles because he basically kept saying, well, the reason we feel it's objective, the morality we have, like against stealing, against killing, is because it's not practical, it doesn't work. If you're a society that constantly steals from each other and kills each other, you're eventually going to be overthrown by a society that doesn't do all those terrible things.
Yeah.
And my point again to him was, well, that just makes us an accident of history. Because I think it goes back to the point you brought up earlier, which is if we rewind the evolutionary process, we could have evolved a very different ethic that was the best and most practical.
Yeah. And then you would also have to weigh how much does 2,000 years of a Judeo-Christian worldview play into our evolutionary biology?
Yeah, the atheists hate hearing that one.
Don't want to hear that. Yeah.
No.
Don't want to hear growing up in a Judeo-Christian worldview how that affects our ethics.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to talk about that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because you hear, and I don't think they're wrong to say this. Frank Turek says this a lot, which is, I can agree with the atheist that you don't need the God and you don't need the Bible to know right from wrong.
Yeah.
And I think Stephen Crowder made a really good point about this, which is, yeah, for the big things like murdering and raping, you might not need God or a Bible to tell you that. But certain things like forgiveness wasn't a universal human value prior to the Bible coming along, and prior to a Judeo-Christian framework.
Yeah, repentance. Yeah, there's all kinds of things. It's I have a book on my list. Well, it's on my bookshelf right now that I'm really really excited to read. But it's called The Barbarian Conversion. And I'm excited to get into that. I think it's by Richard Fletcher. But it's about like how Christianity has affected culture over the times. I'm kind of working my way through. I'm actually reading a book, Road to Modernity, right now. It's talking about the American, English, and French Enlightenment. But I'm kind of working my way back through Christian history. It just kind of fascinates me. I got all the the early church fathers' writings and stuff like that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's just kind of like getting through like the history of how everything's been coming about. But that's ethics is a huge deal. I don't remember who said it. I think Ravi quoted it though, was saying like, every instance of writings of ethics has just been footnotes to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, of just figuring out how people interact with each other or how we're supposed to live as human beings in society, which was, an interesting quote from an ethics professor. But it's true. It's just, if you want to say that morals have been, ingrained in us through biological evolution, well, then you have to also account for the 2,000 years of Christianity and the effect that's had on us as well. So that would, that could easily lead to the historicity of Jesus and the textual criticism and other stuff like that.
Yeah.
I always try and get, these arguments for God's existence. I never just want to leave them at that. I want to get back to Jesus.
Yeah.
And really be able to talk to people about it. So
one of the things you recommended to me to do a video on, which we can do it here, is the taxi cab fallacy.
Mm-hmm.
So I admittedly didn't know what that was when you brought it up to me. So maybe you could explain it to the people.
Yeah. You don't come across the taxi cab fallacy a lot. A lot of it is in science. For instance, the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang came along and everyone kind of freaked out about it. Oh my gosh, this is going to destroy the notion of a God. Now we don't need a God or a creator or whatever. And then as science progressed, we've realized, oh, wait a minute, something outside of time and space and material had to create this Big Bang in order for creation to come about. And so you'll get into, whether it be the ontological argument or the teleological argument, all these scientific arguments that Christians use, is all of this science that we've studied and where we learn from is like everyone jumps on the science bandwagon until it gets to a conclusion such as, well, we're dealing with something outside of space and time and material that's all powerful, that's personal, that created everything. And then they just want to hop out of the taxi cab and say, whoa, we don't want to jump to that conclusion. It's so they'll take the science all the way to the edge until it begs, a divine creator, or it begs a something outside of physical reality that's, as one scientist said, is monkeying with physics, and then they'll just kind of get off the horse and stop. Like, oh well, we just don't know. We need more science to figure this out. So it's more of like following the science where it leads, and then once we get to the conclusion, it's like, well, let's just not worry about the conclusion anymore.
Yeah. So. It's funny, Michael Shermer does that. He did that to Frank Turek in their debates. He kept accusing him of the God of the gaps fallacy.
Yeah.
And one thing atheists like to say is, I'd rather say I don't know than plug a God in the gap in my knowledge. Well, first of all, that's not what we're doing, right? We're arguing from positive scientific evidence.
Absolutely.
But second of all, they are claiming they know. They're claiming they know it's not the God explanation.
Yeah.
Right? If you're willing to say you don't know, how come you're not open to one of the two possibilities?
Then you're agnostic. You're not atheist. You're not making a positive assertion that God doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like if someone wants to say, well, it could be God, I don't know. Okay, that's cool. But when you say, no, we just need more science, it can't be God. That's where it's like, well, now you're just, not looking at all the information. Now you're taxi-cabbing. That's some of the beauty of the scientific arguments. And I'm not a scientist or anything like that. That's my buddy Jesse's field.
Okay.
He's a physics professor. He's working on his master's right now. So he tackles all the science stuff, and I'll tackle all the moral stuff and all that kind of stuff, which is great because we work really well together. But that's kind of the beauty of those scientific arguments. It's one of those things where, and you can even, if someone wants to argue this, well, we just don't know. Well, it's a different type of science. It's an inference to the best explanation. That's what we're kind of trying to infer. If you don't want to accept that, well, that's how Darwin came about with Darwinism. You take a effect and you find out and you posit hypothesis to discover the cause. It's an inference to the best explanation. So most of these scientific arguments are that. When we look at something like the beginning of the universe, whatever it is, you don't have to say God. Whatever it is has to be timeless, immaterial, all-powerful, personal. Like all of these attributes have to be attributed.
Well, Mr. Sir, if I didn't know any better, I'd say you just described God.
Yeah, exactly. It's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
And it's the best explanation. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, if you don't want to say it's God, well, still all of those things have to apply. And that's where I think that's kind of where the power of those scientific arguments really lies. It's definitely, those arguments are definitely geared a little bit more towards scientists, engineers, people who think like that. I've only used those a few times to people who have actually interacted with. Most of the time it's moral arguments or people will have questions about the Bible, which is great. That's kind of where I like to go. So, but they do hold power. They really do.
Mm-hmm. It's funny you bring up Darwin because one of the things is Darwin was considered to be just slam dunk science for such a long time. And, as far as the sciences confirming Darwinism, the atheists, will look at scientists. Where do you anti-science if you want creationism in schools?
Yeah.
And no, I don't want creationism in schools, but that's another topic. But I think Stephen Meyer said the theory of Darwinism isn't going to survive the science of the 21st century. And you see all the new scientific discoveries. We didn't even know about epigenetic information.
Yeah.
We didn't even know about so much of DNA.
Yeah.
One of the things we hear is that we're 96 or something like that, similar to chimps. Well, that was only 96% of 2% of DNA. We assumed the rest of the DNA, the 98%, was useless, and it's turned out it's not useless.
Exactly. Yeah, I've been watching a lot of talks by Stephen Meyer. I have some of his books on my list, and then Behe's books that just came out. Darwin Devolves or whatever, Dissolves.
Oh, I didn't know he had a new one.
Yeah, he has a new one that's out. I think it's you can pre-order it right now. But I agree. I mean, just even from Myers's talks about the information that we're finding in the DNA, the programming, that requires a programmer. It's funny because he'll reference all like MIT guys having these conversations with biological evolutionists talking about there's just information in DNA. We don't know how it got there. And the programmers are like, what are you talking about? You can't just have program lying around that functions the way it does. So these MIT guys are kind of figuring out what's going on. And the evolutionists just don't know how to deal with it. It's true. I mean, he talked about a meeting in England. I can't remember what it was called.
It was at the Royal Society. In November of 2016.
Yep, about how they're just scrambling to find a different evolutionary.
Yeah, And I got criticized for this online. People were saying I didn't know what the meeting was about. And then I second guessed myself. I was like, oh, well, maybe I'm actually wrong here. And then I actually went and looked on the Royal Society's website, and it was about what I was saying. They were calling for revisions in the standard theory of Darwinism because of current scientific discoveries.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's one of those things where it's, they say like stuff will happen in the scientific fields, but it takes a while for it to trickle down into everyday society. So it'll be interesting to see how long it takes. But all those discovery. I mean, look how long it took for the Big Bang to come about. We were discovering all the Einstein's theory of general relativity and Hubble's telescope. It took a while for it to really get down into normal society. But evolution is just so ingrained and so like deep down in everyone's beliefs. It'll be interesting to see how it goes about. But the Discovery Institute's doing some really great stuff. They really are.
Yeah. It's funny. The atheists criticized for a long time. People claimed that evolution was a religion, and I wouldn't use that the same way maybe certain creationists have used it in the past, but certainly the mentality behind it, that you can't even question it.
Oh yeah.
It seems quasi-religious.
Absolutely. In that regard, it does. Absolutely. I mean, you can't question evolution. Heaven forbid you do that. So
it was funny. I was thinking about it too, because, well, even along the lines of stuff we just mentioned, and we're not scientists. I know people are going to be in the comment section, well, we don't know anything about evolution. Well, look, Stephen Meyer knows his stuff, and he debates these evolutionists.
Yeah.
And the idea, he always asks them, what is the naturalistic mechanism that can generate new kinds of information? And none of them can do it.
Nothing.
None of them can name it. But one thing I've been thinking of is there's this kind of narrative from the atheists, which is, primitive man, we believe these religious stories because we needed to explain reality in some kind of way. Mm-hmm. And that's our best way of doing it. But then, as science developed, we were able to be enlightened and be able to do away with those religious stories and have a new scientific framework. And it's funny, the opposite was true with evolution. Back when Darwin came up with the theory, there wasn't a lot of scientific evidence to support it.
No.
And ironically, as the science has gotten better, the less credible Darwinism is.
Yeah.
And by the way, when we say Darwinism, we're talking strictly about the random mutations and the natural selection taking over.
Yeah.
The random mutations can't produce new kinds of information.
Yeah, and Meyer goes into his book as well, like about the Cambrian explosion, like how that just completely. I mean, that was kind of his whole book was about Darwin's doubt about what are we going to find in these transitional fossils in the fossil record, and Meyer goes into the Cambrian explosion, how that's you assumed like there was like a tree, and you have that single cell and it branches out. What Meyer's saying is like it's actually the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Like
that's what the fossil record actually is. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what's showing, and it's just kind of counter to what they were expecting to find. So there's a lot of stuff that's being involved with it. Have you heard anything about Doug Axe?
I know the name. I haven't read any of the stuff.
So he has a lot of stuff too about like the information, the DNA and information, but he actually has this it's him and this other guy are like coming up with ways to like battle cancer based on creating like little mechanisms that will drill into the cancerous cells and stuff. But Meyer just had a recent talk about kind of the science, the new discoveries and new ideas that are coming out from the ID realm, not necessarily like the evolutionary biology, but where ID is taking it, their next step. So it's kind of cool to see where it's going from there. But there's a lot of stuff that's going from Discovery Institute and just discoveries in general. It's cool to see.
It's funny. Well, even in that tree idea that you just showed, where you have the single-celled amoeba at the very bottom, even in that, the information's insane.
Oh yeah,
like the argument when we say, how do you explain these complex forms of information? The argument is always, well, it started off much simpler.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that doesn't get that simple.
The single cell is not simple, not at all.
Yeah.
That's what B goes into. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think Frank Turkey quotes Richard Dawkins' book, which is that in the single-celled amoeba, there's information equivalent to 1,000 volumes of an encyclopedia.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's absolutely wild.
the information that goes in that is it's unreal. But that's that's the fundamental question when you're dealing with DNA and information. You have these small like robotic looking things that are connecting proteins and amino acids together in these chains that have to be precisely the right amount in the right order. And it's just like there's information already in there. Well, the fundamental question, where did the information come from? How did it get there? And no
Yeah.
one ever wants to tackle that. It's like, oh, we there's information in there. It's like, how did it get there? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
So it's no one really wants to tackle the fundamental questions when it comes to science and biology like that.
Yeah. Any opinions you want to share on politics?
I have a ton of things I would like to say.
There's been a lot about it on Facebook about the abortion law passed in New York.
Yeah.
So just real quick, and not that I'm any expert in the law or anything, but essentially what's come out is first, we just heard they legalized abortion not up to birth.
Yeah.
And so everybody on the conservative side was saying, well, look how they basically legalized infanticide. And then the argument from the left came, and they're saying, well, no, the law only allows for abortion up to that late if there's an emergency, right? If the mother's life is at risk.
Yeah.
But then when you delved even deeper into the law, you saw that health was a very broadly defined term.
Oh, yeah.
And as it turns out, first of all, the pro-abortion side or the pro-choice side, if they want to say that, honestly, their best argument would just be the mother has the right to abort her child regardless, right? Because what they're doing with this law is they're presupposing, no, the mother actually wants the child, right? She's only aborting it this late because of an emergency.
Yeah.
And it turns out that emergencies that late in the pregnancy, under no circumstances do they warrant abortion. Yeah. You can do an emergency C-section or you can deliver the baby early. Yeah. But you don't have to kill it for
the baby will survive. I mean, we have the technology nowadays. I mean, we almost have the technology where we could probably incubate a child from like the earliest stages. It's crazy because in it was I think it was Hershey Medical, which is in my area in Lancaster. They had one of the youngest. It was like a baby survived like 9 weeks.
Wow,
it was crazy. Yeah, they gave birth, stuck it in an incubator, and it survived. It's been like 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, obviously the odds aren't good right now. Like it's still like a long way to go. Yeah. But like the technology that we have nowadays, it's crazy how the chances of the child endangering the mother to the point of death, it's very slim. And even when you look into the Planned Parenthood statistics, like those are like such small percentage of abortions. They really are. It's ridiculous in comparison to just everyday abortions. It's bad. It's one of those things where I don't know. I've been kind of just meditating on it for a while. I really hope this bill is like kind of that, the straw that breaks the camel's back, and America really wakes up to what we've been doing. I mean, we've been aborting babies for forever now, and it's like now all of a sudden we're going to get angry because they're saying up to birth. It's like, well, I was kind of angry when we were doing like what is it, 20 weeks, 30 weeks? Like I was angry back then too. Like I'm hoping that this is kind of like a wake up call to wake up America and be like, no, we need to do something about this, like now. Like it's just getting out of hand.
I hope so. And as you point out, the viability argument doesn't hold anymore because as our technology gets better, a baby's viable earlier and earlier and earlier.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's crazy. Yeah, I always have these arguments with people on abortion, and they'll always bring up like, well, what about like rape or incest or something like that? And I went and looked at the Planned Parenthood statistics, and they were literally less than like 0.08% of abortions is like it's like incest, rape, and under the age of like 16. Like those three were like less than 0.8% of all abortions. Wow. And I was like, how do people use that as an argument? Like it's ridiculous. It's crazy.
And look, I'm on the err towards caution side. Like Ben Shapiro's talked about the only instance he believes is justified is when the life of the mother's at risk. Yeah. And he's even gone as far to say if a woman is raped and to carry the child to term would cause such emotional trauma that she would kill herself, he said I would allow for abortion in that instance because it's putting her life at risk. And I tend to line up there too. The problem is people who bring up the rape they're not for a position where abortion is only allowed in the instance of rape. So it's like, why are they bringing it up? They want to use that small percentage to justify the vast majority of abortions.
Yeah, it's just an argument point for them. They don't really care. It's crazy. And then you just hear all those testimonials of like, women like getting raped and then like either having the baby or, letting another family adopt the baby. And they say like it's the greatest thing they've ever done. They have such joy about it. It's like, even good things can come out of like a horrible situation. And I'm not, in any way condoning it. I'm with Shapiro as well on that. If you get convicted of rape, you should either be castrated or killed. That's
absolutely get out of here.
That's where I'm at on stance too. So it's one of those things where it's just like, our laws are a little too lenient. If you put in CNN headline news that some guy was castrated because he was caught raping, I think the rape statistics would drop a little bit if those were your options. If you were convicted of rape, that it's a great deterrent. We've gotten away from that. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's really, I think the thing that happened in New York too also showed the left's true colors a little bit, right? Because there's always, well, I'm not pro-abortion, I'm pro-choice, and it's like, well, hold on, I agree with Stephen Crowder in the sense that I'm pro-choice too. I'm pro 4 choices: abstinence, contraception, motherhood, and adoption. I'm just not pro the 5th choice, which is the active taking of another human life. And with the bill in New York, if it really is only meant for women who their lives are at stake, right? They're going to die if this baby isn't aborted. Well, that's an awful, sad, tragic thing. Why are they celebrating by lighting it up, by lighting up the city with pink?
Exactly. To me, I don't even think it has anything to do with that. I think it's a political ploy. I think any Democrat who runs and is pro-abortion, and if there's any backlash to the bill in New York, it's just going to be a talking point, a political talking point. Well, they're against women's health, or they're coming to get you women, and it's just the left does anything to create these talking points, and it's just to just not care about life is ridiculous.
I hate the identity politics that's tied into it too. Like you and I, as 2 heterosexual white men, aren't really allowed to have an opinion about this. I know. So, as my buddy Sev would say, I'm still waiting for my white privilege check to come in the mail.
I never got mine either. I never got mine.
Yeah, it's the silliest argument. Like somebody posted on Facebook, it was something like, those hard to swallow pill memes?
Yeah.
It was one of those, and the hard to swallow pill was, you personally not liking abortion isn't a reason to ban abortions for all women. And I didn't do this.
Yeah.
I wanted to comment and say, hard to swallow pill, you personally not liking slavery isn't a reason to ban all slaves for people who really need them.
Exactly.
Like it's the same argument.
Same argument. It is.
Either abortion's wrong or it isn't. It's not that I personally don't like it.
Yeah.
It's that it's killing a baby.
Yeah. And that's where the fundamental argument goes to. Is it a life? That's the fundamental argument is, do you define it as a human life? And you get into embryology and you read any embryology textbook, well, at least the ones that we've had before. The most recent have probably been all sorts of doctored up ever since that. But any embryology textbook tells you, when the zygote is developed, it has its own DNA that's separate from the father, it's separate from the mother, it's its own being that is developing into a human, has potential into a human being. That's when life starts. And if you want to argue something different, well, science is on our side. So if you, want to tout your science flag, by all means do so. Let's go look at the science and we'll, make our decision from there. Iowa just passed a bill about heartbeat, which, okay, that's, we're getting there.
That's definitely right in the right direction.
It's a step in the right direction. Hopefully we can continue to get it further. But any scientist that would speak out on this is just, they're either going to lose their job or they're just going to be ridiculed to the nines. So it's one of those things where it's, and it's just like the evolutionary debate. These scientists, they just don't want to talk. They don't want to give their 2 cents. They can't. So it's sad to see, but it's that's the fundamental question is if it's a life, then we need to do something about this.
Mm-hmm.
So
You know what's actually really strange about that is, and I can remember this back. How long ago was it that I got into apologetics? It was like 7 or 8 years now when I first got into it. I
nice.
was a I was a teenager, and when I first got into it, I was really hardcore on Kent Hovind. I don't know if you know who he is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and even at that time, the stuff I was watching from him was from years
Yeah.
before that.
Yeah.
And one of the things he complained about was in the science textbooks, they have Ernst Haeckel's drawings of embryos. And so all the embryos, everything starts out, it looks like a fish.
Yeah.
And then it kind of changes as the development goes on. Well, that was proven 4 years after he came up with that theory that he faked those drawings,
Yeah.
that the embryos actually looked extremely different, even in the earliest stages.
Absolutely.
And, you know, it's been 8 years. I haven't studied Kent Hovind a lot lately. And I saw somebody actually post something who was pro-abortion, and they were saying, look at the early stages of the embryos. And it was from a current scientific textbook, and they still had those drawings in there, those fake drawings.
Yep.
I was like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Really?
We don't want to make scientific progress in certain areas. We're all about progress in other areas, but man, it's just, I mean, even the history of Planned Parenthood, like what was the chick's name? Margaret Thatcher? Like does anyone
Margaret
study
Sanger.
his Sanger, yeah. Sorry, not Thatcher. Jeez. But if anyone like studies history, like go back and look what she was saying back then. Why she came up with this. Why do you think Planned Parenthood facilities are in the inner cities? Why in 2012 did New York abort more African American babies than were actually born?
I
Like there's
know.
yeah, there's
It's
like
wild.
yeah, there's crazy, like people just don't study history. They don't look into why these things came about. It was completely eugenics. It was completely racist. They wanted to get rid of all the poor people and stop them from reproducing. That was their goal. It's just
Yeah.
like nobody wants to talk about that. No one wants to talk about where it started. It's just garbage. It really is. It's just
Yeah.
ignorance.
I know, and people always argue that we still need Planned Parenthood because they'll say, well, abortions are only a small percentage of what they do, which actually the statistics on that are
Not so
really
much.
fudged.
Yeah, not so
But even
much.
if you go with that, they say, well, they provide birth control and they do all these things. It's like, that's what crisis pregnancy centers are for. And there
Yeah.
are more crisis pregnancy centers in America than there are abortion clinics. And,
Yeah.
everybody thinks that crisis pregnancy centers are a bad thing because they saw a John Oliver special on it, which, by the way, Steven Crowder did a video refuting his whole bashing crisis pregnancy centers, which
Yeah.
really what it came down to was we don't like crisis pregnancy centers because they provide everything except for abortions,
Except portions. Yeah.
which is what it came down to.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's absolutely
Yep.
ridiculous.
There's certainly other alternatives.
Yeah, like those are people who actually care about women in hard situations,
Yeah.
because that's always the argument is, well, women need abortions because you don't know what kind of situation they're in. And it's like, no, Planned Parenthood makes money. If you come in there for something other than abortion, they try to upsell you to the abortion. You
Oh
think
yeah.
they care about the mother in the hard situation? They want her in a hard situation so they can sell it easier. Somebody who really cares about women in a hard situation is Greg Kokel, who's adopted 2 children
Yeah.
from crisis pregnancy situations.
Yep.
Like that's who
Yeah.
really cares about these women.
Yeah.
And it's just,
Coke does some great work. I don't know. You ever watch the Defenders classes with William Lane Craig on YouTube?
mm.
He has like a
I have
whole
them all on the app, and I keep wanting to watch them in order. And so then when I
yeah.
see one on YouTube and I haven't seen all the prior episodes, I'm like,
Yeah.
crap, no, I can't do this.
Yeah. Like he has like the doctrine of creation and like all these different Christian doctrines, and he goes through like Calvinism and Arminianism and Molinism, and it's a really good discussion because that's where I kind of had some clashes with professors at school with Calvinism. So it was cool to like read up on that and then to watch those videos, and I ended up writing a paper on it. So it was
Oh,
fun.
nice.
It was cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
always
yeah.
fun.
Well, so okay, so here I haven't asked you about you. How did you come to be a Christian? Out of curiosity.
I'm a PK man, so I'm a lifer. My
Okay.
dad is he's a pastor, missionary for a long time. I mean, ever since I was little. So he's been traveling over to Russia since the early '90s. I
Hmm.
actually I lived in Moscow for a year. Our family flew over and we lived there for a year.
Oh
Um,
wow.
yeah, so I've always I mean, I feel like I've always been a Christian.
You speak Russian?
I used to. I used to be pretty good at it. It kind of fades away if you just don't use it. So it's one of those things. It's funny because people will come in like to my work and they'll like be speaking and I'll like hear it and kind of understand what they're saying, but I can't ever communicate. Comes and goes. I feel like if I got immersed again, I would remember. It would come back to me pretty quick. But it was a lot of fun. But yeah, it's so traveling around like that. Been a Christian my whole life, and then apologetics really came about in a weird way. It wasn't necessarily me like questioning my faith. I feel like I've always had a grounded faith. It was actually interactions with atheist friends of mine. So I was at work with a coworker of mine who's an atheist, and my boss who probably New Age spirituality kind of stuff. But we were just after work having these conversations, these deep philosophical conversations, and they pressed me with a lot of questions that I was just like, well, I know why I believe what I believe, but why do I believe what I believe? Mm-hmm. So my apologetic journey was probably more on the evangelistic side of sharing my faith with others. That was kind of the greatest pull I got from apologetics was the courage to be able to evangelize and to be able to answer questions and to be able to ask questions. And so my journey for apologetics was that it really did strengthen my faith. I wouldn't say I ever like questioned my faith, with their questions, but it was definitely a cool journey. So it's been, I don't know what, 2000. So I've been like studying it hardcore for probably about 3 years now. So it's been fun. Been a lot of fun.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm similar. I was raised a Christian, and sometimes when people ask me, I kind of wish I had the J. Werner Wallace story. Well, I was an atheist, and then I got persuaded by the evidence. It's like, nah, I was just raised that way.
Yeah.
Kind of the boring thing the atheists say was like, well, you only believe it because you were brought up in the church.
Yeah.
It's like, well, genetic fallacy, but we don't have to go there.
And that was one of the questions that I got from one of my bosses, but like it didn't even apply because both of those guys were raised in Christian homes. And now one's an atheist and one's into New Age spirituality. I was like, so it doesn't even apply to your situation. Like, if we were all raised Christian, how are you now an atheist? How are you now a New Age spiritualist? Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I just don't understand that the genetic fallacy. It's just not going anywhere. Like, it doesn't take into account the complexity of human beings, the complexity of factors that go into an individual developing a belief system and changing their minds as many times as they do.
Yeah.
And like, it just, I don't even think it can get off the ground.
Yeah. And when people think Christianity is just a brainwashing, that's what you're automatically going to jump to. So.
Yeah. Well, Michael Shermer says, because he says he used to be a Christian. Yeah. And he says one of the realizations he had was, well, I just happened to be raised with the correct God, and a Muslim, he was raised to believe in Allah, and he believes as fervently as I do, and I'm so arrogant as to think I have the one correct God. And my thought is, all you have to do to point out how silly that is just expand your scope a little bit to include atheism as a worldview. And if someone's raised as an atheist, you could say, oh, well, you just happen to be raised with the correct worldview. What are the odds of that?
Yeah, or actually do a comparative religion study and look at all the religions. I mean, it's not hard. People are just lazy about it. They just want to say, all religions are the same, or how can I say that guy's wrong and I'm right? It's like, well, go study your religions. Go see what they're saying. There's some issues with Islam, of course. Christianity is rock solid. Christianity is it is the only religion that's based on a historical fact. Like, Paul says if Christ wasn't crucified, then our faith is in vain. So it's like, if you can go back and find solid evidence that Christ was raised from the dead, or if you want to go back and challenge that view, you can. You're free to do that. Go dive into your religion and see what it says. People don't ever want to do that. They just want to be like, well, they believe Islam, I believe Christianity. We both probably worship the same God. It's like, no, Allah is not Yahweh. Go look at the Quran, read the Quran, and then go read the Bible, and you can find out real quick that they're not the same. So It's just, I don't
That's
know.
why I find it funny when people are religious pluralists and,
Yeah.
they believe, oh, all religions are basically the same. There are some differences. Those are man-made. And I'm thinking, well, even if you hold to religious pluralism, you have to exclude Christianity from that.
Yeah.
Because either Christ rose from the dead, which means all the rest of them are false,
Yep.
or he didn't, in which case you have to exclude it because then nothing else about it matters.
Yeah.
It's just
And
completely irrelevant.
and that's what people don't understand is all religions claim exclusivity. Like that, it's people, like, religions don't just say, no, 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 you can worship whatever you want. Like, okay, there might be a branch of religion that believes that, but if you want to take the big religions of the world, they all claim exclusivity. Buddha's nirvana and his way to enlightenment, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, they all claim exclusivity. So it's not a matter of, well, maybe they're all right. It's like, no, 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 no. Either one's right and they're all wrong, or they're all wrong. Like, you got to go and look into them. You can't just. It's just like this intellectual laziness that happens.
Yeah, it's funny. This always happens to me. I have a conversation with somebody, and I wish I would have the right thing to say, and then like the next day, I'll be watching a Q&A video with Dr. Craig, and he answers. I'm like, oh, that's what I should have said.
I should have used that.
Yeah, but
I was having that one, man.
Yeah, well, because Frank Turek did a whole hour podcast on religious pluralism, and one of the points he made that I really liked was, often the reason somebody adopts religious plurality is because they want to believe everybody gets to heaven, right?
Yeah.
They don't want to think they don't want to think somebody else because they have a different religion is going to go to hell or something. He said, but if you think about that, what that actually means is that what you do in this life is unrelated to your destiny, because then everybody gets to heaven.
Yeah.
Ultimately, so nobody can actually make the choice for themselves.
Absolutely.
Where they end up in eternity.
Yeah.
I thought that was a good point.
No, it is. It's people don't think about what they say, or they don't rationalize the conclusions that they come to, or what it means.
Yeah.
People, there's just this philosophical, they just lose it. I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it. There's some people I talk to that they're like, well, I'll look into religion some other time. It's like, man, like, the question of, is there a God, is the most fundamental question you could ask. It literally is the most fundamental question you could ask. Like, how is that not like the most important thing on your list?
Yeah.
Whether you're studying philosophy or theology or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
as Frank Turek says, you're going to be dead a lot longer than you're going to be alive.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
at that point, that's the only thing that's going to matter.
Yep. Yeah.
Like, and you don't know how long you might think I'm going to live to be 90. It's like, you don't really know. Like, that might be the first question you want to get sorted out is what happens in eternity.
Yep. Yeah, I'm pressing a guy at work right now. I just gave him Knowledge and Christian Belief from Alvin Plantinga. He's this kid I'm working with. He's a really smart kid, like really into like philosophy and political science and stuff. And then we have some really good conversations. And I pressed him on Christianity. He's like, yeah, I feel like I tried it a little bit and it just kind of didn't work for me. And I was like, what? Like, did you actually look into it? Like, and so as this guy who's really philosophical in the way of his thinking, I was like, I'm gonna hit him with some Alvin Plantinga, because he's like, I'll read something, but can you make it short, because he reads a lot of books. And I was like, okay, man, like, I'm not gonna hit you with Reasonable Faith where it's like 300 pages of like deep philosophical thought, but Alvin Plantinga is super deep as well. So I got him with that book. Hopefully, that's the little lure, or as Greg Kogel says, the stone in someone's shoe. So let's hope this works. But yeah, I'm hopeful with him. He's a very reasonable guy. So we'll see how this goes.
Good. Yeah, it's fun. That was kind of my thing. Like, I like how J. Warner Wallace says it, which is, I'm not a Christian because it works for me.
Yeah.
I'm not a Christian because it fulfills some need or some goal or something. He's like, I'm just a Christian because it's true.
Exactly.
And I would say that, like, I was raised in the church. I always believed in God. I always believed in Jesus. But I would say until I think I was like 18 when I got into apologetics. Until then, I really struggled with it.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know Like if God had a purpose for me, if he cared about me that much, like because I was going through some serious things. So for all intents and purposes, Christianity did not work for me.
Yeah.
Like there were a lot of times when I said screw this, like life sucks. Why do I care about a God who clearly doesn't care about me? And the intellectuals, I know often apologists make the distinction between the emotional and the intellectual, but for me, developing the intellectual really satisfied a lot of the emotional stuff that was going on.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, especially in our Western church today, we almost gear on the emotional side too much. You don't hear a lot of theology or philosophy or apologetics in our sermons today. It's really interesting. I have our pastor come into our reasonable faith classes, so
nice.
It's really cool how you can kind of see like he's got these little nuggets in his sermons now with different ideas of apologetics and stuff.
That's cool.
It's really cool. Yeah, we're going through a lot of like, I guess he's going through a course of like, what does Christianity say about like different topics? So like, we were talking about marriage, we were talking about abortion and life. So he actually asked me to come up and give a non-Christian argument for the pro-life movement, which I thought was interesting. But it was kind of cool how he kind of connected it, because he was going to give the Christian view, based on the Bible and what the Bible says about life. Where should we stand on the abortion argument? So he went through a lot of different topics, that was pertaining to like, everyday life, which I thought was really cool. And he's been doing that for like a few months now, which is pretty cool. But, it's kind of cool how apologetics, it almost just triggers this thing in your brain about like, okay, how am I rationalizing this? Like, how am I rationalizing Christianity? And, it's certainly a need in our church today. And I'm really hopeful and thankful for guys like Craig and Kokol and all Turek and all these guys, getting the message out there to the churches and stuff like that. So it's I'm really optimistic about it. I'm really looking forward to seeing what's going to happen. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, same. I need to try to get like Turek to come to my church or something.
Yeah.
I'm still working on getting there. I got the reasonable faith certificate and still trying to get it in my church. We were supposed to start this past fall.
Yeah.
And then they at the last minute changed up what things they were teaching and offering. And so I didn't make the cut. So
yeah.
Full disclosure to Tyson James, I have not officially started up my chapter yet.
Man, just if anyone's interested in your church, just meet him for coffee sometime. I mean, that's kind of the best way to do it. Jesse and I, it was kind of funny how we were doing it, because Jesse, he had his certificate way before I did. And he was just kind of, wanting to start a chapter in Lancaster, didn't really like know how to do it or what he wanted to do. And then I emailed Tyson and was letting him know that I was pursuing this. And he's like, well, there's a guy in Lancaster already who already has his certificate. Like, do you guys want to like meet up? And I was like, sure. So Jesse and I got together and we're like, dude, let's do this. And it probably was like a month later and we started the chapter just like that. So it was kind of, it was like, I talked to the lady who makes the bulletins at church, put a little snippet in that. I had some friends that I talked to that I was like, hey man, we're starting an apologetics chapter, like come check it out. So it was just kind of like a spur of the moment kind of thing. It didn't have to be some big, huge thing. But it's been fun. It really has. It's been challenging too. It's interesting to see, like, you'll study to learn and stuff like that, but there's a different form of learning that takes place when you're teaching it.
Right.
Like when you're teaching it to others. That's really like, oh wow, it like really gets ingrained into you. It's been cool. It's been cool to see.
One thing that strikes me, and we say this a lot about the New Testament, but I think it's also true of the Old Testament, is it's not written in a narrative way. It's written as people who are recording history.
Yeah.
Like these stories could have been a lot more interesting if the purpose of the author was to entertain the readers. But for the most part, they're saying, here's Jacob went here, and then he married this person, and then he traveled to this land and did this thing. It's really...
It is. It's one of those things where, and that's kind of where I would almost ask similar questions. based going off of Peterson's, his view of, he's going through his biblical lectures that he did. It's one of those things where, like, I would ask him, like, do you think these events actually occurred, or do you think someone's writing these to get, like, almost like like there's an underlying truth, like it's a meta narrative, like there's an underlying truth that someone's trying to get across, and they've created these stories. Like, he kind of never takes that approach. Like, I think Abraham was an actual real person. Like, he kind of takes it. He kind of just takes it as, this is a story, and you can't just write it off because someone's trying to get a truth across, and it doesn't matter if it's real or not. You're missing the point. And it's one of those things where it's like, as a Christian, I believe Abraham was a real person. So it's like,
yeah,
it's not to me, it's not an either or. It could be a both and. I believe Abraham was a real person, but I also believe that the story of Abraham, there are underlying truths that the Bible is trying to get across to people. And it's cool to see Peterson tackling those. And it's like, I don't even know if he believes those people really existed, but the fact that he's relaying these underlying truths has some real cultural significance, especially here in the West, because the Bible has just been shoved aside for so long. And it's cool to see all these, like, atheists in his audience listening, being like, wow, I never really thought of it like that. The Judeo-Christian worldview has shaped our culture for so long, and we're trying to push this book off like it's fake. It's like, well, there could be underlying truths, that shaped our culture that you're not seeing. So it's cool to see him actually do that. I would probably press him on whether or not he thinks they're actual real events. It's interesting because I don't think Peterson would respond to questions in public the way he would in private, just the way he presents himself. There's a lot of questions that he just kind of either sidesteps or just says.
And to be fair, he doesn't want to get put into a camp.
Exactly.
That's what he said.
Yeah, all power to him. I feel like that's probably a smart move on his point.
Yeah. Like, I would want to say that to him, like, if I ever got to meet him in person, I'd want to have the God conversation. But I'd say, look, let's not record it. Let's just do this private, because I don't want you to think that I'm trying to box you in anyway. Yeah. No, it's funny, my mom's gotten kind of frustrated. Like, she'll say, imagine how much good Peterson could do if he were saved, if he were a Christian. And on the one hand, I think that's true. But I also think God uses people. He has a purpose. And so, like, yeah, Peterson's not saved. I hope he eventually gets there. I hope that's the end goal that God has for him in mind. But don't think God doesn't use him the way he is. No. Maybe not as a traditional Christian. Because, look, he's opened up the door for so many atheists who were saying, if he were a Christian, they wouldn't have been interested.
There's no way that he would have made the impact that he did had he come out and said, I am a Christian. There's no way he would have had the same amount of followers. Even the transgender issue, that bill that was passed in Canada that pretty much launched this whole deal that he's doing, had he come out and said, I'm a Christian and I don't believe in this, they would have squashed him so fast and nothing would have came about with this. So it's like, in one point, I think what he's doing is really amazing. And like you said, I really hope he does get saved. I hope he does believe in Jesus. But he is certainly making an impact. It's amazing to see the doors that are open. Like, even people that I talk to who aren't Christians, they've either listened to Jordan Peterson or read, Maps of Meaning or 12 Rules for Life or something of that sort, or watched a video with him, loving him, owning the libs. Somebody, they've all watched something of him. So it's just kind of cool how he's being used.
Yeah. It's funny, Steven Crowder actually said something about it on one of his shows. He turned to Gerald Morgan Jr. and he was like, do you think Samson and Delilah is a real story? Like, do you think that's a real thing that actually happened, or do you think it's just a story? And Gerald Morgan Jr. was like, well, I think it really happened. Why are you asking? He's like, I don't think a guy would be that stupid. Like, he told her, like, that's why he doesn't think it's a real story. He's like, I told her what makes me weak. It was a lie. Yeah. And then she did it. Yeah. Oh, well, now I'm really going to tell her.
Now I'm going to tell her the truth. Yeah.
I think it was a real story. I think, he was a typical guy.
Yeah.
He was, not to be crude, he was getting some.
Yeah.
probably, and
No, I think
he
you
was in
were.
love.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's cool to think about, and like especially listening to these talks by Peterson. Like, I never even really looked at it that way. Of like looking at, I love his psychological background, how he's kind of looking at the story. Like, he went
I
through Cain and
know.
Abel. He went through Cain and Abel, dude. It was like a 4-hour lecture. I
On
was like,
10 sentences.
it's
That
like
story's
10
10
sentences.
sentences.
Yeah, I was like, dude, this is unreal what you're doing right now. Like, how are you still talking? It was amazing, but it was so deep, and like he was just going through. He was just every rabbit hole had some kind of connection that was, and I was just like, dude, this is like, okay, Cain killed Abel, man. Like, you could say that, but to him it was like, no, 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 this is a bigger deal. Like, this is like, a huge, he was killing what the manifestation of what he was to become. Like, he had all these different, like, psychological appealings to what was happening, and I was just like, dude, that is so deep, man. I never would have thought of anything like that. So it's really
Yeah,
cool to see.
yeah. I'm definitely grateful to him. It's actually cool that he's not coming at it from the perspective of your typical pastor. It's like,
Yeah.
and he's opened up a whole new world for pastors
Oh
and
yeah,
for people like
absolutely.
us to understand just the depth of the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Peterson was saying, and it's funny, he was actually using this in a different context, but it made me think about the Bible differently.
Yeah.
No, he's talked about when you read history, for example, when you read about the Nazis or Soviet Union, Russia, he's
Yeah.
like, you can read it as the victim, but you should read it as the perpetrator. Like,
Yeah.
when you're reading about history, you're reading about you. You're reading about what humans are like. Like the
Yeah.
Nazis, we don't like to think about. We like to think the Nazis were some horrific, monstrous
Mm.
breed, but really they were just people. They were
Yeah.
just humans like you and I are,
Well,
and
yeah,
we're capable of the same stuff.
they had photos of like Hitler, like chilling with his kids. Like, he had like two daughters or whatever, and they had, I don't know if they were, it was an interview where they had writings of like his maid, and his maid was like, he was just a normal dad. Like, he was a nice dad, like lived a normal life at home. And I'm just like, what? You
Yeah.
just, you think of these guys being like monsters. Even Stalin.
Mm-hmm.
Stalin had a daughter who he like adored. And it's just like, these guys were like, I don't know. It's crazy. I mean, obviously they were evil men. They had evil intentions, but
Yeah.
there
I mean,
there's certainly a human aspect to them.
yeah, it's one of the things Peterson makes a case for, which is why it's so important to get yourself under control and
Yeah.
conduct yourself in life in a manner that those evil things within you won't manifest,
Yeah.
and you won't become that. Now, granted, what we talked about earlier, we have the benefit of being raised in a Judeo-Christian society that's
Yeah.
had that kind of influence on us since we were born.
Yeah.
But it's one of the things I would like to give a sermon on it to a church, because we're always taught from the Bible. For example, the story of Joseph and his brothers. We're always taught from the perspective of us being Joseph,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, you're probably going through a tough time now, but look what God can be using it for in the future. And we never read it from the perspective of being one of his brothers. We
Yeah.
never read it from the perspective of being the Pharaoh who lied and threw him in prison, or
Yeah.
the one who betrayed him. And
Yep.
I think it's important to look at it from all those perspectives.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is. Yeah, there's it's definitely cool to see. It's, I don't know, it's crazy. Like, I've been going through his lectures, and I'm like, I don't know if I would recommend these lectures to people, but I would recommend these lectures to people. You know what I mean? Like, it's like don't take everything he says as, like, there's a lot of things he said that I was just like, nah, man, like, that's just not right. Like, that's just not the right interpretation. But at the same time, I was like, but I like your effort. I like what you're doing. I like how you came to that conclusion, or like, I like how, you thought about things. But it's just like, I don't know. I don't even know how to like phrase it. I would take aspects from it, that are really essential, that are really good to like reading the Bible, you know. But it's, I wouldn't consider everything that he said accurate.
Right.
He
I
had
mean,
made.
it could even be good just to say if you have an atheist friend who's hostile towards Christianity and
Yeah,
isn't even willing to listen to your arguments, to say, "Hey, check these out. Just see if you think there's anything to the Bible, even
yeah,
if you don't believe it literally."
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool to see it, how it's affecting culture.
Yeah, yeah, he's, and I think his mission isn't primarily religious right now either. I think he's especially in the political realm, he's having such a positive impact.
Yeah,
and just helping us, young conservatives or classical liberals to think clearly about this
yeah,
kind of stuff.
which is huge.
Yeah.
It's so dumbed down, man.
On that note, we've done 2 hours, and I'm losing my voice.
I know you
So
got a drink too. Here, I forgot a drink.
so yeah, I feel like in the screen it looked like an alcoholic beverage. It was just green tea.
Just some whiskey.
Not that there's anything wrong with drinking alcoholic beverages,
No.
but it was green tea.
Nice.
But anyway, this was awesome.
Yeah, this was fun.
Should definitely do it again.
Yeah.
Maybe next time, pick an issue, maybe moral argument or something that we can debate.
All right.
I'll debut my character.
Okay.
Something. Make it happen.
Is there a dog drinking water?
Yeah. That's funny that you do. That's what that sound was. Do you have a dog?
Yeah. I was just like, what is that noise?
It's like I have a pool beneath my feet. I'm splashing it.
Just kicking some water. No, that's cool, man. Yeah, I'll be down with that.
Awesome. All right, so just to do the outro, that's Reasonable Faith Lancaster. So I said it right. Yep. Zack Armstrong, go check him out. His church is Lancaster Alliance Church. If you want to inquire about when the Reasonable Faith meetings are.
Yep, that's where we meet. That's at Jesse's church. I go to a different church, but we meet at the Lancaster Alliance Church.
Right on. All right, well, Zack Armstrong, thank you so much for being here, and hope to have you back soon.
Absolutely, looking forward to it.
Boom. Okay, and that is where I will cut the video out right now. There he is.
There he is. I knew you were there.